Donald Trump is spiraling, absolutely spiraling, and the panic is exploding in real time. Late last night, while the world is watching a dangerous military confrontation unfold with Iran, Trump is flooding social media with frantic posts insisting that the United States has virtually unlimited munitions and that wars can supposedly be fought forever. Forever. Think about how insane that sounds. Because while real military officials are warning about strained missile defenses and limited interceptor production, the President of the United States is online pushing fantasy narratives about endless weapons and unstoppable arsenals. This isn't confidence. This is desperation. And the posts are getting more bizarre by the minute. Trump isn't just claiming infinite weapon stockpiles. He's ranting about the deep state, comparing himself to Richard Nixon, and once again obsessing over the imaginary theft of the 2020 election, all while a real geopolitical crisis is unfolding. That's not leadership. That's a meltdown. And here's what makes this situation even more disturbing. While Trump is loudly telling the public that America's arsenal will last forever, members of his own administration are quietly admitting the exact opposite. On camera, with numbers, with facts. And once you hear what they actually said, you begin to understand something terrifying. This entire narrative Trump is pushing is already collapsing. Now, here's where the story gets even more absurd, because Donald Trump isn't just panicking. He's actively rewriting reality in real time. For months, Trump and his allies have been repeating the same line over and over again, that America's military power is unmatched, that our stockpiles are overflowing, and that any conflict would be easily handled because the United States is supposedly sitting on mountains of weapons. That's the narrative they've been selling. Total strength, total readiness, total control. But suddenly, in the middle of this crisis, Trump himself is online, insisting that the United States can fight wars forever because our munitions are basically unlimited. Let's slow down for a second. Because when someone starts shouting that loudly about infinite weapons, it usually means the opposite is true. And the contradiction becomes obvious the moment you start comparing Trump's claims with what his own administration is admitting publicly. Let me walk you through this. Trump is posting overnight that America's stockpiles have never been higher, and that wars could theoretically go on indefinitely with the weapons we have. That's his claim. But now let's look at what members of his administration are actually saying when reporters start asking real questions. During a press briefing, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is describing the missile situation with Iran. And what he says is stunning. Rubio explains that Iran is currently producing more than 100 missiles per month. 100. Now compare that to the United States' ability to produce interceptors, the defensive systems used to shoot those missiles down. According to Rubio, the United States is producing 6 or 7 interceptors per month. 6 or 7. Do the math. Iran, roughly 100 missiles per month. United States, 6 or 7 interceptors per month. You don't need to be a military strategist to see the problem here. So while Trump is telling the public that America can fight wars indefinitely with endless weapons, his own Secretary of State is effectively admitting that the production gap is massive. That's not strength. That's a strategic vulnerability. And Rubio didn't stop there. He also revealed something else that blows a massive hole in the administration's narrative about why this war started in the first place. According to Rubio, the so-called imminent threat from Iran wasn't actually about a direct attack on the United States. Instead, the justification was that Israel was preparing to strike Iran. And if that happened, Iran might retaliate against American assets in the region. Read that again. The United States didn't act because Iran attacked America. The United States acted because Israel might attack Iran first. That's the logic. And when that admission came out, even members of Congress were stunned. Because suddenly, the entire justification for this escalation starts looking less like national defense and more like a reckless geopolitical gamble. Now let's slow this down and actually examine the details, because the deeper you go into the statements coming from Trump's administration, the more disturbing the picture becomes. Let's start with the numbers that Marco Rubio just casually dropped in that press briefing. I want you to really think about what he said. Iran, according to U.S. intelligence estimates, is producing over 100 missiles every single month. Not 10, not 20, over 100. Now, compare that to the number Rubio gave for American interceptor production, the defensive systems designed to stop those missiles. The United States can currently produce 6 or 7 interceptors per month. Pause there, because that number should stop you cold. 6 or 7. If those figures are accurate, and remember, they are coming directly from the Secretary of State, that means the production imbalance is staggering. Iran's missile output is massively outpacing the defensive interceptors designed to stop them. And yet, while this reality is being acknowledged in official briefings, Donald Trump is online claiming that American weapons stockpiles are essentially endless. You can't make this up. One side of the administration is admitting a production gap that could become a serious military vulnerability. The other side, Trump himself, is spinning fairy tales about infinite weapons. That's not strategy. That's chaos. But the contradictions don't stop with the weapons. Let's go back to Rubio's explanation of why the United States entered this confrontation in the first place. Because what he said reveals something extraordinary. Rubio explained that the imminent threat was based on the belief that Israel was about to strike Iran, and that if Iran were attacked by Israel, Iran would likely retaliate against American forces in the region. So the reasoning was this: if Israel attacked Iran, Iran might retaliate against U.S. personnel. Therefore, the United States needed to strike Iran preemptively. Think about how convoluted that logic is. The United States didn't act because Iran had attacked America. The United States acted because someone else might attack Iran, and Iran might respond. That's the chain of logic being used to justify a military escalation. And when lawmakers started hearing that explanation, the reaction was immediate. Senator Mark Warner, one of the senior members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, stated plainly that there was no imminent threat to the United States itself. None. There was a potential threat to Israel, yes, but equating a threat to Israel with an immediate threat to the United States is an entirely different strategic calculation. And that's where this story becomes even more troubling. Because if you follow the timeline, the justification for this operation appears to be shifting constantly. First, it was about nuclear weapons. Then it was about missile programs. Then it was about protecting American forces. Then it became about preventing retaliation for an Israeli strike that hadn't even happened yet. The goalposts keep moving. And when the goals keep changing, it usually means one thing. The people running the operation don't actually have a coherent plan. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is watching this unfold with growing alarm. France has already made clear it will not commit its aircraft carrier to the operation. The United Kingdom's leadership has said they will not send troops into what they view as an unlawful war. In other words, the traditional coalition partners that normally stand beside the United States in major military operations are not signing up for this one, which leaves the United States and Israel largely standing alone. And that isolation raises another uncomfortable question. If this strategy was truly airtight, if the intelligence was truly overwhelming, why are America's closest allies refusing to participate? Because the deeper you look into the evidence, the more the situation starts to resemble something far less controlled. Not a carefully planned operation, but a rapidly escalating crisis driven by political pressure, shifting justifications, and a president who appears to be improvising in real time. And the consequences of that kind of decision-making can become catastrophic very quickly. Now step back for a moment, because what we're watching right now isn't just one bad decision or one confusing military explanation. This fits into a much larger pattern that has defined Donald Trump's entire political career. Chaos, impulsiveness, and a constant stream of contradictions that make it nearly impossible to tell whether there is any strategy at all. Remember, this is the same Donald Trump who spent years telling Americans that he would end endless wars. He campaigned as the man who would bring troops home, stop foreign conflicts, and stop the United States from acting as what he called the policeman of the world. That was the promise. But now listen to what he's saying as this conflict unfolds. On one hand, Trump has repeatedly claimed that he wants to avoid new wars and reduce America's military footprint overseas. On the other hand, his administration is now escalating a confrontation with Iran, while simultaneously claiming that wars could theoretically be fought forever because America supposedly has endless weapons. Those two positions cannot exist at the same time. Either you are trying to prevent endless wars, or you are casually talking about fighting them indefinitely. But that contradiction is classic Trump, and it goes far beyond foreign policy. Look at the way he talks about elections. Even in the middle of a growing international crisis, Trump is still obsessively claiming that American elections are rigged and stolen. He continues repeating the same conspiracies about 2020, as if the entire world hasn't already moved on. That kind of fixation tells you something about where his focus actually is. Not governance, not strategy, but grievance. At the same time, his allies in the media are working overtime to defend the narrative. You see television hosts trying to frame this as a heroic partnership between Trump and Israel, presenting the escalation as some kind of grand strategic breakthrough that will somehow lead to peace in the region. Peace. Through escalation. Through missile exchanges. Through expanding military confrontation. That kind of logic is the definition of magical thinking. And the international reaction is telling. France has already refused to send its aircraft carrier. The United Kingdom has publicly stated it will not commit its forces to what it considers an unlawful conflict. Those are not minor diplomatic disagreements. Those are America's closest allies signaling that they are not convinced by the justification being presented. So what does that leave? A United States administration pushing shifting explanations for a war, a president ranting online about infinite weapons and conspiracies, and an international coalition that appears increasingly reluctant to follow. This is why so many observers are starting to say the same thing. This isn't a single policy failure. It's a warning sign. A warning sign that the decision-making process at the highest levels of power is becoming dangerously unstable. And when instability meets military escalation, history tells us exactly what can happen next. Miscalculations, escalations, and consequences that spiral far beyond what anyone originally intended. That's why this moment matters so much. Because what we're watching right now isn't just another political controversy. It's a test of whether reckless leadership and chaotic narratives can push the world into something far more dangerous. So let's step back and be clear about what we're witnessing right now. On one side, you have a president telling the American people that the United States has endless weapons, that wars could theoretically be fought forever, and that everything is completely under control. On the other side, you have his own administration admitting serious production gaps, shifting explanations for why this conflict started, and allies around the world refusing to join the operation. That gap between rhetoric and reality is where the truth lives. And the truth is simple. Democracies cannot function on fantasy narratives and late-night propaganda posts. Leadership requires honesty, accountability, and a clear explanation of why American lives are being placed at risk. Right now, those answers simply are not there. And that's why independent media matters more than ever. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we actually follow the facts and expose the contradictions, make sure you hit subscribe and share this video. Because the more people who understand what's really happening, the harder it becomes for misinformation to take hold. And we're going to keep calling it out every single time.